retired Navy, politics/patriotism, Michigan football fan, hunter, father and faith-driven, repeal the 17th Amendment.
Wait, what?
We need to repeal the 17th.
Oh, no.
You've introduced a resolution to repeal the 17th Amendment. What's in it?
Well, basically, it repeals the 17th Amendment, as you say.
Was that a sitting U.S. federal representative?
The United States Constitution currently has 27 amendments, the most recent of which having been certified by the Archivist of the United States on May 18, 1992. And although it has an interesting story of its own, topic of today is, of course, the 17th. Ratified almost 100 years earlier in 1913, from this point on, senators were now elected by all voters in their respective state.
Amendment 17. The Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, elected by the people thereof for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote.
Before this, senators were elected by state legislatures, each state's version of Congress. At the time of writing the Constitution, it was an uncontroversial decision, and you can see why when pointing out the cultural heritage to Europe, the British Empire specifically. Britain has a parliament, which is composed of a House of Commons, the lower house, elected directly by the people, and an upper house, the House of Lords, which to this day are still appointed positions. Uncontroversial does not mean unanimous, though, and even at the time of writing the Constitution, there were people like James Wilson who believed that it should be a popular vote. Like many people, James Wilson was a complicated fellow. Despite his belief in democracy, he was far too willing to accommodate slave states, to the point where he was actually the first person to propose a 3/5 compromise, denoting slaves and indentured servants as less than a person, 3/5 of a human being. He was willing to declare sentiments in favor of allowing slave owners to have security against anyone who might attempt freeing their slaves from subjugation. The time period he's from shouldn't shield him away from criticism. After all, the only reason a compromise had to be made in the first place was because others were opposed to the idea of accommodating slave states. Although the reasoning may have been varied, there was, in fact, a large group of people who believed slavery was just outright inhumane. Another delegate from the same state that James Wilson was from, Pennsylvania, made an impassioned speech on the issue. His name is Governor Morris.
The inhabitant of Georgia and South Carolina who goes to the coast of Africa and in defiance of the most sacred laws of humanity tears away his fellow creatures from their dearest connections and damns them to the most cruel bondages, shall have more votes in a government instituted for protection of the rights of mankind than the citizens of Pennsylvania or New Jersey who views them with laudable horror. So nefarious a practice.
Anybody advocating for social change deserves scrutiny. Even if they succeed in revolution, you have to understand what it is they represent. With this in mind, let us critically analyze the movement to repeal our 17th Amendment. In the spirit of democracy, I want as many people involved in the conversation as possible if we are in fact going to be altering a constitution that 300 million people currently live under. I suppose a good starting point would be with the clip I played you earlier, an actual sitting U.S. representative who introduced a resolution in Congress just this year to begin the process of repealing the 17th Amendment.
You've introduced a resolution to repeal the 17th Amendment. What's in it?
Well, basically, it repeals the 17th Amendment, as you say, that took the power away from the states.
So there's his first major claim. The federal government has too much power now, and so we must repeal the 17th Amendment to give power back to the states. But you might inherently notice something wrong or off with the argument on first listen. After all, senators are still voted in by their state. The only difference is that instead of state legislature, it's now the entire state voting population. Let's keep listening to what Representative Keith Self has to say.
because our founders were very wise. They balanced the state's authority with the federal authority. We have totally unbalanced it now with the federal government having too much power and the states having too little say-so. So this would make the senators be selected by their state legislature. So rather than having 6-year politicians that have their national ambitions, they talk to Washington insiders and worry more about the institution of the Senate, they would be more worried about how they are serving their constituents in their state through their elected state legislatures.
I see. Okay. So the argument is that senators are now too focused on national politics and overlook state and local issues. Okay. Why? What exactly made it so that when senators were elected in by their state's voting population, they stopped caring about state issues? How does this change cause that? Unfortunately, Keith Self doesn't go into detail, at least in this interview. Going to his official public congressional webpage, we can identify some logical reasoning. By originally having state governments elect national politicians, it was a check and balance. By changing it up, national politicians don't have to abide by political wishes. This is the same argument as in his interview, but refined for official publication, of course. But it still contradicts itself, even in its own writing.
Repealing the amendment would return authority to state legislatures, bodies that remain directly accountable to local voters, and give states a stronger voice in Washington. Senators would once again have powerful incentives to defend state interests and protect the 10th Amendment.
But local voters are already holding senators accountable by electing them. Keith Self may have been the representative to introduce the resolution to repeal the 17th Amendment, but he is not the only supporter. It currently has 9 co-sponsors as of me making this video. One of them, Representative Eric Burleson from Missouri, said this of his support of the repeal.
As originally envisioned by our framers, the Senate was a key bulwark of federalism. It was meant to give the states a check on the federal government and moderate the passions of the people.
This is a clear answer. Unlike Keith's wishy-washy answers, Eric Burleson gives us an underlying thought. The people must be moderated, because they would make decisions based on passion rather than logic. If you agree with this take ideologically, I can't knock you for a belief. What I can do is break down an argument with noticeable flaws and contradictions. As David Webb, the man who interviewed Keith Self in those clips I played you, said directly to Keith in that very same conversation,
this is something that I think the Republicans need to not just take on, but need to go out and have the conversations with people.
So, as the people, let's have this conversation. I'll say my position clearly, right here and now. I don't support repealing the 17th Amendment. In order to back up their claims, these 10 representatives will often reference the United States founders. Keith mentions the founders' original vision on his webpage. Burleson talks about what was originally envisioned by our framers. Arizona Representative Paul Gosar describes it as what the founders intended. And Louisiana Representative Clay Higgins claimed that the founders knew what they were doing. But once again, I have to wonder why that really matters. The founders, as I've pointed out, were complex people with various perspectives. What did it even mean to say this or that is what they would have wanted? Rather than basing our decision on what was originally intended, shouldn't we judge using data? We've had just about 100 years of each way of electing senators being in place, so there's a lot to pull from. But even before that, can we just ask ourselves a simple question? Why are we the ones doing this? Shouldn't they have the data to back up their claims? If it's really true that having senators be elected by state governments is better, because people are too passionate, back up your argument. These are sitting congressional representatives who are attempting to overturn an expansion of democracy, and they can't even give a good reason as to why. So that's what we should focus on next. But I promise you, by the end of this video, I will be pulling from data to support why we should not repeal the 17th Amendment. Keith Self is a member of the House Freedom Caucus. Actually, all of the members who are sponsoring this resolution are, with the possible exception of Representative Victoria Sparks. The reason I say possible exception is because unlike most political groups at the Capitol, the House Freedom Caucus doesn't publish a list of its members. While they do openly endorse certain candidates, allowing us to identify members like in the photo, we don't have a full idea. What we do know is what the caucus stands for in their own words. It's a group of people who all agree on a mission to restore representative government by standing up to unchecked federal overreach, wasteful spending, and legislative backroom deals that too often silence the voices of everyday Americans. So there you go. The people who argue that we need less federal overreach are all coming together, and they've even formed a caucus to oppose a popular vote for senators. Wait. Hold on. So, yes, it's assumed that nearly all of the members of the Freedom Caucus at the time were opposed to certifying that Joe Biden had won the 2020 presidential election against the current president, Donald Trump.
The House Freedom Caucus held a news conference demanding Attorney General William Barr provide the American people with full transparency into the allegations of election fraud here in 2020.
To look into these allegations, to really give it the effort that it's worth.
You know, I agree with my colleagues to say where there's smoke, there's fire. You have to start somewhere. And there's credible evidence, there's credible testimony that there are problems here.
We're coming down to the wire.
What was their basis for attempting this and stoking public rage?
It is easy to see the contamination of this ballot. But we're not going to stand for that, are we? Hell no!
To the point of eventually fueling an insurrection at the Capitol, that the election had been stolen by fraud. It should be noted that much of the original posts by these people have been deleted on their accounts since January 6th, for what I can only assume is to avoid legal trouble. It's important to note that members of Donald Trump's own campaign knew that much of the popular talking points being brought up were false. Despite even this memo being drafted, the legal team challenging the election were a separate group altogether, with Trump's lawyer at the time, Rudy Giuliani, stating under deposition that he'd never even seen it, and that the people who wrote it probably wanted Trump to lose because they could raise more money. Do you believe him? Does it matter? The facts of the case are clear. He wanted an election overturned, regardless of whether he actually believed there to have been fraud. After the 2020 election, Trump filed multiple lawsuits which found no evidence in his favor, even when the case came before a judge that he had appointed. I can't say whether Paul Gosar or any other members of the House Freedom Caucus were true ideological believers, but like the Trump campaign, the fact of the matter is that their actions have real ramifications regardless. In both attempts with the presidential election and the 17th Amendment, they are trying to erode a popular vote based on disinformation. They use the language of populists to generate a narrative that they fight for the people, while actively working to dismantle the ability for the people to elect their public officials, based on the idea that people are too easily swayed by passion. But passion is exactly what they encourage. It's what led to so many people raiding the Capitol building with weapons, breaking down windows, and attacking those seen as in the way. These people are fascists. Gosar in particular has co-sponsored legislation to repeal birthright citizenship for undocumented immigrants since at least 2011. His idea of society is exclusionary, and even if he supports freedom and democracy, it is only based on decisions made by the right group of people. Much of the 2020 fraud claims had to do with the lie that undocumented immigrants were voting en masse.
In the state of Arizona, over 36,000 ballots were illegally cast by non-citizens.
When the Associated Press looked into it, they found fewer than 475 cases of fraud, which were uncoordinated at that. The truth doesn't actually matter, because it supports his narrative. He wants those people out of the country he lives in, so he supports the claim. The election was fraudulent. The undocumented immigrants are a problem. We need to overturn the 17th Amendment. When the Senate was originally devised, and James Wilson advocated for popular elections, he likely didn't imagine it including black people or Native Americans. And when Keith Self introduces a resolution to repeal the 17th Amendment for the people of Texas, he's not including immigrants, going so far as to state birthright citizenship devalues the meaning of American citizenship and the sanctity of American citizenship. He certainly isn't including Muslims, calling the entire culture
Stuck in the 8th century, and if they succeed at imposing their beliefs upon us, we will be dragged back into the Dark Ages.
And of course, he isn't including trans people who he would argue are all living in a fantasy.
What do you say to those people who say it is disrespectful for you to call a man who thinks he's a woman Mister?
Well, Michael, I'm a retired Green Beret. I'm not even sure what all the fuss is about. I mean, he is allowed to live his life. In fact, I spent 25 years on active duty defending his right to live his life as he chooses. But I don't have to participate in his fantasy.
So, having made clear that these people are indeed bad actors, let me finally put to rest any argument that there is a legitimate reason to indeed repeal the 17th Amendment, as long as we're all coming at it from a place of good faith. I did say I would eventually get to this point, after all. The Brookings Institute looked at every state legislature vote for senators from 1871 to 1913, which totaled 752 elections, summing to 577,042 votes. In doing so, they found that more than 2/3 of legislatures held office for only one term, which was typically 2 years, undermining any claim that before the 17th Amendment, senators were able to be held to their promises by a more moderate group of thinkers, in contrast to the passionate voters. The voters, it seems, were more than willing to vote out any state legislator who they pleased. Having a direct popular election, in contrast, means most people who voted for a senator into office will still be around to judge their performance 6 years later when they run for re-election. So I support the 17th Amendment. As someone who truly believes in democracy, I can't abide while seeing the movement to upend a major step forward in human social progress. If you feel the same way and are feeling encouraged to do something about it, then please get involved with your local mutual aid organization. Start organizing on your campus or workplace, your neighborhood and district. People fought for the democratic gains we now have the ability to use. Don't let them be stripped away, as many have already.